We'll now talk about money market yields. Money market is the market for short-term debt instruments. The most common short-term debt instrument in most markets is a 6-month government T-bill. This is an example of a pure discount instrument, and what that means is the following. When the government issues a 6-month T-bill, it says that at the end of 6 months, it will pay back $1,000, and the amount that the government collects initially might be $950. This is from the government perspective. From the investor perspective, he is purchasing the bond for, or the T-bill for 950. So that's the investment. 6 months later, he will receive the face value of 1,000. The interest of 50 over here is a discount relative to the $1,000 face value. The market where a T-bill such as this trades would be called a money market. We also have short-term instruments which are based on a borrowed amount plus interest. So it is possible that a company issues a short-term bond where the company borrows $1,000 initially and then pays back $1,000 plus 5% interest at the end of 1 year. So this would be an example of borrowed amount plus interest. In any case, the market where short-term instruments such as this trade is called the money market, and in this segment we will talk about the various kinds of yields that are used in this market. Here is the list of yields, and we will discuss each one of them. The first one is bank discount yield, and this is used with T-bills. Bank discount yield is equal to the discount divided by the face value multiplied by 360 over number of days remaining till maturity. Let's say the government issues a bond for 950. So this is how much investors pay for the bond, and the face value is 1,000, which means that after 6 months, assuming this is a 6-month T-bill, the investor will get 1,000. What is the bank discount yield on this instrument? If we use this formula, the discount is 50. That is the discount relative to the face value. We then divide by the face value, which is 1,000, and then multiplied by 360. That is the convention used when we calculate bank discount yield, divided by number of days to maturity. 6 months means 180 days. Generally, we take 30 days per month over here. If you do the calculation, you will get 0.1, which is equal to 10%. So 10% here is the bank discount yield. If you look at this formula carefully, you should be able to detect 3 issues. The first one is that the interest amount, which is the discount, $50 over here, is divided by the face value, 1,000, rather than the investment amount, which is 950. What we normally do when calculating a yield is divide by the investment amount, but that is not what happens when we compute the bank discount yield. The second issue is that we are using simple interest. In other words, 50 over 1,000 gives us a rate, and then given that we have a 6-month instrument, to annualize, we are simply multiplying by 2, 360 over 180. So we are using simple interest rather than compounding. And finally, we are using a 360-day year rather than a 365-day year. Next, we move to the holding period yield, which we have discussed briefly before. Essentially, this is the yield over the investment period. In the example that I just discussed, if we invest 950 at time 0 and 6 months later we get 1,000 back, then the holding period yield is 50 divided by 950, 950 being the investment amount, and this is equal to 5.26%. In this particular case, other than 1000, the investor doesn't get anything else. If this were a coupon paying bond and the investor were to get a coupon payment, then obviously that would be also included in the holding period yield. If this were a stock and the investor were to get a dividend at the end, then both the capital gain, end price minus beginning price, and the dividend would be considered. So again, the holding period yield is simply the total yield or return over the investment period. The investment period could be 6 months, 3 months, and so on. Next, we'll talk about the money market yield. The money market yield is simply the holding period yield multiplied by 360 over T. In our example, the holding period yield was 0.0526. So we take 0.0526 multiplied by 360 divided by T. T here is the number of days to maturity. Let's say it is a 6-month instrument, so that becomes 2. The money market yield then is 10.53%. Notice that the money market yield is greater than the bank discount yield, and that is because we are using holding period yield where we divide interest by the initial investment. With the money market yield, we only have 2 issues. The first one is simple interest, given that we have a holding period yield which is simply being multiplied by 2, and the second is that we use a 360-day year. The issue that we had with bank discount yield, where we divide by the face value rather than the investment amount, that issue does not exist with the money market yield. And finally, the most precise measure is the effective annual yield, where we take 1 plus the holding period yield. In our example, the effective annual yield is 1 plus the holding period yield raised to the power of 365 over 180 minus 1. So notice that we are compounding now, given that we are using an exponent. We are using a 365-day year, and since we have the holding period yield, return is based on the initial investment and not the face value. So the effective annual yield does not have any issues. And this number is also higher compared to both the bank discount yield and the money market yield. Now I want you to try this question, where we have a 90-day T-bill which is purchased for $9.90. The face value is 1,000. So use the formulas that you've learnt and come up with your answers before you go to the next slide. Here is what you should come up with. The bank discount yield is the face value minus the investment amount. So this is the discount number divided by the face value multiplied by 4. 4 because we have a 90-day instrument. So 360 over 90 is 4. We get 0.04, which means the bank discount yield is 4%. The holding period yield is simply the final value divided by the investment minus 1. So that is 0.0101 or 1.01%. We could have also simply done 10 divided by 990 being the investment amount. This will give us the same answer. Money market yield is the holding period yield into 360 over 90. That gives us 4.04%, which is higher than the bank discount yield. And with effective annual yield, we take 1 plus the holding period yield and then raise to the power of 365 over 90 minus 1, and this gives us 4.16%. At times you might be required to convert between different yield numbers, and in different textbooks you might see complicated formulas to do this. But rather than memorize complicated formulas, I think it is best if you simply understand the concept. Let us now talk about converting between different yield measures. Say you are given the fact that the money market yield is 12% for a 6-month T-bill, and you are asked to find the bank discount yield. The way you do this is first compute the holding period yield. Given a 12% money market yield and given that you know the formula for the money market yield, you can compute the holding period yield. Then, recognizing the fact that if you have a par value of 1000 and you know the holding period yield, that means you can find the discount. If you know the discount, then you also know the investment amount, which is 1000 minus D. You can then easily find the bank discount yield by simply doing D divided by 1000 multiplied by 360 over T. So in some textbooks you'll find complicated formulas, but the concept is fairly straightforward. The trick is to find the holding period yield and then use that to come up with the discount, and then once you have the discount you can calculate the bank discount yield. If you have the money market yield, it is easy to come up with the effective annual yield, because again you first compute the holding period yield and then the effective annual yield is simply 1 plus the holding period yield raised to the power of 365 over T minus 1. If you are given the bank discount yield, then based on the bank discount yield you can come up with the discount, and if you know the discount and you know the par value, you can come up with the investment amount, which will simply be the par value minus the discount. You can then compute the holding period yield, which is essentially the discount divided by the investment amount, and then the money market yield is simply the holding period yield into 360 over T. And finally, bank discount yield to effective annual yield. Here again, once you have the holding period yield, it is easy to compute the effective annual yield, and the formula has been shown a couple of times already. The bond equivalent yield is a slightly tricky concept. I will explain it briefly over here, but we will see this in a lot more detail later when we cover fixed income securities. Bond equivalent yield is simply 2 times the semi-annual yield, and this convention is used with bonds because almost all over the world bonds pay a coupon every 6 months or semi-annually. Let's say that you purchase a bond for $1,000 and in return you receive a $40 coupon every 6 months, and then you receive the par value of 1000 at the end of year 4. Notice here that with a $1,000 investment, you are getting $40 or 4% every 6 months. The bond equivalent yield is simply 2 times the semi-annual yield of 4%. So the bond equivalent yield is 8%. Notice that the effective yield, however, will be more, because the effective annual yield is going to be 1.04 raised to the power of 360 or 365 divided by 180 minus 1, and this is going to be slightly more than 8%. But again, in terms of the bond equivalent yield, all we do is come up with the 6-month yield, which is also the semi-annual yield, and multiply it by 2. That brings us to the end of this reading, and to summarize the main points, we talked about the concept of net present value, which is simply the present value of future cash flows minus the present value of the investment. A positive NPV means that you are adding value, and that is good. Negative NPV means that you should not accept those projects. Internal rate of return is that return which makes the NPV equal to 0. And you want to accept projects where the internal rate of return is greater than the opportunity cost. We then talked about portfolio return measurement and discussed the holding period yield. Then we talked about the money weighted return and time weighted return. And finally, we talked about different money market yields. The key items to know over here are the formulas for the bank discount yield, the money market yield, and the effective annual yield. And also the fact that the holding period yield can be used to go or convert between these different yield measures. Final remarks. As I say at the end of every reading, go over the learning objectives in the curriculum and make sure that you understand all of them. The examples and practice problems in the curriculum for this reading are a little bit difficult. You can try to do them, but if you have problems, don't worry too much. At the very least, try to read the solutions and make as much sense of them as you can. But it is extremely important that you practice as many questions as possible from various other sources, such as Schwezer, the practice problems that we provide, and so on. If you do sufficient practice, this material is going to be easy. Also, the material that you see here is foundation material for what will come in many other parts of the course. So make sure you understand time value of money and the various applications of time value of money very well. That's it for now.